So we're continuing on with our discussion of common network threats. We've just talked about denial of service. Let's move on to the other types of network threats that you'll run across. The next type we'll talk about are reconnaissance attacks. And reconnaissance attacks aren't really destructive attacks like denial of service in and of themselves. They are usually a precursor to a denial of service or an access attack. The best way to think about a reconnaissance attack is like a burglar casing the joint. If someone's going to break into your house, generally they're not just going to walk up and break the window and walk in. The burglar will take time and watch and learn. He leaves for work at 7:30 and his wife leaves for work at 7:45 and drops the kids off at school on her way to work. And so no one's in the house from about 8:15 to about 3:30 until the kids get home. And he'll watch your neighbors and figure out when your neighbors are there. He'll pick the best time, given all of the information that he can gather from watching you, and then use that information to his advantage to attack you at your most vulnerable. And honestly, that's precisely what a reconnaissance attack is. The first thing they usually do is they'll snoop around the network looking for IP addresses that respond. They'll figure out this is your public IP address range. This is outside your firewall. So you know what? I'm just going to run a ping sweep. I'm just going to ping every device on your subnet. I'm going to see which ones respond to a ping. Those that respond to a ping get examined for vulnerable services. They'll use a tool like Nessus or Nmap or any number of vulnerability scanners to interrogate any open ports and any open IP addresses for any type of vulnerability that may be out there. Let's say there's a buffer overflow in a particular version of SSH that you're using that allows you to get root access. Or let's say you're running a website that's vulnerable to a SQL injection attack. These tools will give you a pretty comprehensive report of exactly what's going on your network and exactly what's wrong with your network. And to be honest, they can be used by us as the good guys as well. We can take these tools, run them against our own network, and discover, oh, this particular executable is vulnerable and it needs to be patched, and here's the patch for it. The bad guys, however, take all of this information, they gather it all up in one big pile, they decide the best way into your network, and they'll use all of the information they gathered in a reconnaissance attack in a later attack all at once when you're not really expecting it. They'll do it at 2 o'clock in the morning local time, when there's not someone sitting there watching the network and watching the servers blow up and go down. And depending on what kind of network monitoring you have in place, they could have free run of your network for 3 or 4 hours before you wake up and figure out what's going on. So that leads us to the last type of network threat, which is an access attack. An access attack, as we've mentioned previously, usually follows a reconnaissance attack. An access attack will exploit a vulnerable service and cause it to malfunction, thereby giving more access than the service was originally designed for. You heard me mention SSH on the previous slide. That's actually a very good example. There was a flaw in a specific version of SSH about 5 or 6 years ago, that if you ran SSH and allowed root login, then this particular version of SSH would accept any password as the root password. Needless to say, that is not really how it's designed to work. Now, those of you that are doing professional network security would probably just had your head spin around. You don't allow root access through SSH. You don't allow root logins remotely. You only allow root to log in from the console. But if your sysadmin is lazy or ignorant, they may just turn that option on in the config file, and they've just opened up that server and potentially everything else on the network to an attack from an access attack. Now, a password attack is also a type of access attack. Some people will split it up because technically you're not really exploiting anything in a password attack. But a password attack is when an attacker attempts to guess a username and a password to gain access to the network. You've probably done a password attack yourself when you've gone to a website and forgotten your password. Well, is it A? Is it B? Is it C? You've got your list of passwords that you generally use on websites, and you keep going down the list until you find one that actually works on the website. Obviously, that works for you as the actual owner of that username and password combination, but the bad guys can also use that method of access to get on your network whenever they really shouldn't. We'll talk about how to mitigate that in the next video, protecting the users from the scum of the network. But for now, that concludes our discussion of common network threats.